Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Gavin Brooks. I make my living in the trees. If you've ever watched a crew take down a dead pine leaning toward a cabin or clean storm damage off a roof line, I'm the guy on the rope, the guy up high with a saw that looks too small to be trusted. I live north of Ely, Minnesota, the kind of place where winter is not a season. It's the default setting. People come up here to feel small under the pines and to hear nothing but wind in their own boots. I stayed because this is the only place that ever felt quiet in the right way. When the outbreak started, the first mistake everyone made was thinking it would stay down south, that it was city trouble, highway trouble, other people trouble. I watched it creep up the same way everything creeps up now, through short clips on a phone screen and half-truths from officials trying to keep people from panicking. The clips were always shaky and always cut off early. The explanations were always confident and always wrong. I didn't have special information. I didn't have a friend in the government or shortwave channel full of secrets. I had two things: a sense for risk and winter coming. When you work in trees, you learn to read the small warnings. The rope fibers that look fine until you flex them. The limb that looks solid until you tap it and it's hollow. The wind that seems steady until it shifts 10 degrees and everything changes. The outbreak was like that. It was never one big obvious sign. It was a chain of little problems that lined up. A hospital in Duluth diverting ambulances. A sheriff's office in St. Louis County asking for volunteers to help with traffic control. A rumor from a guy at the hardware store in Ely that his cousin in the cities saw people get attacked in a parking lot, and nobody used the word bite out loud, but everyone kept touching their neck when they talked. Then the shelves started to thin out, not empty all at once, just odd gaps. Baby formula in one aisle, over-the-counter cold medicine in another, canned meat going fast, propane cylinders. People buying things that didn't make sense together, like they were shopping for 3 different emergencies at once. That's when I stopped thinking about what was happening and started thinking about what was going to happen next. I'd been a climber long enough to know the basic truth. When trouble comes, people go horizontal. They spread out, they run. They drive until the road ends and then they push farther. Up here, in winter, horizontal gets you killed. You run out of road, run out of gas, run out of traction, run out of daylight. Vertical was different. Vertical was my comfort zone. Vertical was ropes and anchors and controlled movement. Vertical was less visible, less accessible, and harder to rush. When I thought about it that way, the answer felt obvious. I wasn't going to build outward, I was going to build up. I didn't say that out loud to anyone at first. People hear Treehouse and think of a weekend project with a nail gun and a cooler of beer. What I had in my head was not a childhood fort. It was a winter platform that wouldn't advertise itself. A place that wouldn't glow at night. A place that wouldn't hum with a generator. A place that could go dark and still function. The first few days, I stayed in my small rental outside Ely and listened. I watched the roads. I worked like it was an ice storm cleanup because that's what my brain knew how to do under stress. Make lists, check gear, handle problems in an order that made sense. I packed my climbing kit, harness, lanyards, carabiners, a friction hitch cord, 2 mechanical ascenders, a throw line, and my main climbing rope. I brought climbing spikes too, even though I don't use them on healthy live trees for work unless I'm removing the tree. Out there, I wasn't preserving anything. I was surviving, and spikes meant speed. I checked my saws and chose the compact one I could run with one hand if needed. I don't care what people say in videos. One-handed saw work is dangerous. In tree work, you avoid it whenever you can. But there are moments when you need to cut fast with your other hand controlling your body position. That compact saw had a short bar, a sharp chain, and a pull cord that started on the first or second yank, even when it was cold. I stocked extra chains, a file, bar oil, and premixed fuel. I picked hand tools too. A folding saw for quiet work, a hatchet, a small pry bar, a drill with charged batteries, and a manual brace as backup. I packed fasteners that mattered. Structural screws, carriage bolts, washers, and a handful of nails for things that didn't take load. I grabbed rope, real rope, not cheap stuff, because rope was my lifeline and, if needed, my door. For food, I kept it simple and heavy. Calorie-dense stuff, peanut butter, oats, rice, pasta, canned beans, canned fish, cooking oil, powdered drink mix, salt. I'd learned the hard way on winter jobs that you can feel full and still be short on calories. Cold pulls energy out of you like a tax you can't avoid. For water, I brought filters, but I also brought metal containers. You can filter a lake. You can't filter ice unless you melt it first, and melting takes fuel. Up here, the lakes are everywhere, but in winter, everything is locked. People who haven't lived through a real January in the North Country don't understand how much work it is to get water when it's all solid. I packed a small stove and fuel, but I made one rule for myself right away. No heat unless I had to. Heat meant smoke. Heat meant a heat plume. Heat meant the smell of something alive. Heat meant attention. The last thing I added was a simple rifle. I'm not a collector, and I'm not trying to sound tough. Up here, lots of people own firearms because it's normal. You might need to put down a wounded animal or deal with a predator. I kept mine locked and clean, and I knew how to handle it safely. I also knew it was loud. Loud in winter is louder. Sound travels farther over snow and ice, especially on cold, still days. A gunshot in sub-zero air can feel like it's bouncing off the trees. I promised myself I wouldn't use it unless I was out of options. Not because I was trying to be noble, because the real danger wasn't one target. The real danger was everything that would hear it. On the day I left, the last normal thing I saw in Ely was a line outside a gas station and a guy in a hoodie yelling that the government was lying. Nobody yelled back. People just stared at him with the blank, tight faces you see when everybody is thinking the same thing, but nobody wants to say it first. I drove out on smaller roads until I hit the edge of places people bother to name. Beyond that, it's just forest and water and old logging cuts grown back thick. The kind of land where you can park a truck behind a stand of spruce and not be seen from a mile away. I chose a frozen logging trail I'd worked near before, not the main ones. Not the ones where snowmobiles go all winter. A narrow track that used to be busy years ago and now only got occasional traffic from hunters in fall. It ran between low ridges, crossed a couple of swampy spots on rough corduroy, then disappeared into a basin full of tall pines. I walked the last half mile on foot, carrying too much and listening too hard. The woods were quiet, but it wasn't peaceful quiet. It was the tight, held breath quiet you get before a storm. The cluster I picked was a group of mature pines growing close enough that their lower trunks made a messy maze. They weren't all touching, but they were close, and their crowns tangled overhead. From the ground, you couldn't easily see the sky through them. That mattered. If someone looked up from a distance, they'd see canopy, not structure. I climbed the first tree the way I always do. Slow, methodical, checking bark and dead wood, feeling for stability through my spikes, keeping my center of gravity where it belonged. My rope went around the trunk high, my friction system set, and then I was above the snow line where the world gets smaller and the air feels different. From up there, I could see the logging trail like a pale scar, and the frozen wetland beyond it like a flat sheet with little black points where the brush poked through. I could also see movement far off. Slow shapes, not natural, not animal. That was the first time I saw them clearly in winter. Not in a video, not through a windshield. Real bodies, out in the open, moving like they were working against thick water. Their arms hung wrong. Their legs didn't lift cleanly. They didn't look like movie monsters. They looked like people who should have been dead, walking anyway. And the cold was already changing them. I could see it in the stiffness, in the way they turned too slowly, like joints were locked, in the way they would stop for long seconds and then start again, as if the signal telling them to move had to push through ice. That gave me hope and fear at the same time. Hope because the cold was an ally against anything that relied on muscles and fluid movement. Fear because if the cold could slow them, it could slow me too. The cold didn't pick sides. I started building that day. I didn't build like someone filming a tutorial. I built like a climber who knows load paths and failure points. I kept the platform low in the canopy, high enough that nobody could reach it from the ground, low enough that I wasn't swaying like a flag in wind. I used the trunks as my main supports, running beams between them with hardware that would hold under freeze-thaw cycles. Wood shrinks and swells. Metal contracts. Fasteners can loosen if you don't plan for it. I pre-drilled and used washers where they mattered, and I checked each connection like it was an anchor point for a lifeline, because it basically was. I didn't cut more than I needed. Every cut makes noise. Every cut leaves fresh scent. Sap is a signal in the woods. I saved the loud saw work for times when the wind picked up and the canopy hissed. When it was still, I used hand tools and patience. The platform ended up about 8 feet by 10 feet, with a second smaller shelf a few feet away for storage, connected by a short rope bridge. The bridge was not a cute swinging thing. It was a simple, tight span with hand lines and foot slats, built so I could cross with gloves on and not lose my balance when the wind hit. I made 2 more short connectors to neighboring trees, each one designed to be pulled up like a drawbridge. I rigged them so a single tug on a control line would lift the far end and lock it high enough that someone on the ground couldn't grab it. The control line stayed on my side. From a distance, with the bridges up, it looked like nothing, just trunks and branches and shadow. A person could walk under it and never think to look for a floor hidden in needles and limbs. That was the point. I didn't build walls right away. Walls make wind noise. Walls catch a snow load. Walls create hard edges that your eye notices. I built a low-profile shelter, more like a nest inside the structure, with insulated panels and a tarp skin that matched bark and needle color. I kept it broken up visually. No straight lines, no shiny surfaces. For warmth, I used layers and sleeping systems first. A good winter sleeping bag, a closed-cell foam pad, and another pad to keep my body from losing heat into the platform. People think cold comes from the air. In a shelter, cold comes from what you're touching. I set up the tiny stove in a way that made me nervous and proud at the same time. I vented it through a pipe that ran up and out into the canopy, disguised along a branch line so it didn't stand out like a chimney. The pipe had a cap to keep snow out, and I made sure the heat stayed controlled and minimal. I wasn't trying to be cozy, I was trying to keep my fingers and toes attached. The first week, I could still hear distant human activity. Engines. A helicopter once, far off, chopping across the sky like a saw blade. Then gunshots, scattered, then fewer, then none. After that, the world went quiet in a way I had never experienced. Not a peaceful quiet, a dead quiet. the kind where you realize how much background noise civilization makes all the time. I rationed my phone battery. I kept it off most of the time. When I did turn it on, there was less to see each day. Some texts from friends that didn't go through, a couple of emergency alerts that repeated the same useless advice, then nothing. I settled into a routine because routine is survival. Mornings meant checking my hands and feet first. Frostbite doesn't always announce itself with pain. Sometimes it's numbness and a white patch, and you only notice when it's too late. I'd pull off a glove, flex fingers, make sure the skin color came back. I'd check toes, wiggle them, and if they felt sluggish, I'd move more before I did anything else. Then I'd check the rigging. Ropes stiffen in cold. Knots can seize. Ice can form where it shouldn't. I'd knock snow off load-bearing lines, check abrasion points, and make sure my control lines for the pull-up bridges still ran smooth. After that, food. I tracked calories in my head like a budget. In the cold, a grown man doing physical work can burn thousands of calories a day. If you don't replace them, you don't just feel hungry, you get stupid, you make mistakes, you fall. Out here, one fall could be the end. I kept meals boring on purpose: oats with peanut butter, rice with canned fish, beans with oil and salt. When you're stressed, you want comfort food. When you're trying to stay alive, you want predictable fuel. Water was the real work. I'd climb down only when I had to. I chose a small frozen seep area where the ice was thinner and the water underneath moved. Moving water freezes differently. I'd chop carefully, listening the whole time. A single solid hit of metal on ice can ring out like a bell. I learned to work slow, pry, and crack rather than slam. When I got water, I hauled it up in containers and melted snow only as a backup. Snow is mostly air. You need a lot of it to get a little water, and it takes time and fuel. Time and fuel were both things I protected. The infected, the ones people called zombies because nobody had a better word, were there in the woods, but winter made them different. In warmer weather, I think they would have been more unpredictable and more mobile. In the cold, they were slower, but they didn't go away. They also didn't decay the way you'd expect. The cold preserved them. It tightened skin. It locked joints. It made them look like bad mannequins under snow-dusted jackets. Some would wander into the basin and just stand there, barely moving, like they had paused. But the moment a sound carried, some of them would wake up. A branch snap. A tool clink. Even the crunch of my own boots when I misstepped on the crusted snow. The sound would travel, and you could see heads turn slowly, one by one, like a row of broken compasses responding to a magnet. That taught me the first major winter rule of the outbreak. Cold slows movement, but it does not slow attention. Sound in winter is a flare. The second rule was worse. Cold makes you think you can get away with more. You see them stiff and sluggish and you start taking chances. You start believing you have time. That belief is how people die. By mid-December, the temperatures dropped hard. The kind of cold that makes trees pop at night like distant gunfire. The kind that makes your nose hairs freeze when you inhale. On those nights, I used the tiny stove for short bursts, just enough to bring the shelter above dangerous levels. I kept the flame low. I watched the exhaust. I timed it with wind and snowfall when I could. Snow helps hide smoke. Wind breaks up scent and carries it away. Still, air is the enemy. Even with discipline, I knew I was not invisible. I was just hard to notice. I was a ghost, but ghosts still leave footprints if they're not careful. The first serious injury happened because of something stupid, a glove. I was adjusting a line and my right glove snagged on a rough screw head. The glove caught, I pulled, and the screw tore a seam. A normal day, I would have fixed it later. But cold doesn't let you do things later. I told myself I'd just finish the adjustment. 30 seconds, I thought, maybe a minute. My bare fingers touched metal and rope stiff with ice. The numbness hit fast. I finished, climbed back into the shelter, and realized my fingertips were pale and waxy. I warmed them slowly, the right way, with body heat and careful movement. I didn't panic, but that was the moment I accepted that winter was going to be my main threat, not the infected. After that, I got stricter. No bare skin outside the shelter, no rushed work, no shortcuts. I treated every movement like it was on a job site with an inspector watching, because mistakes were permanent now. Weeks turned into months. I stopped counting days by dates and started counting them by weather patterns. Storm cycles, wind direction, how many times the sun broke through, how thick the ice got on the smaller ponds. I talked out loud sometimes, not because I was losing it, but because I needed to keep language active. Silence can eat your brain. I'd describe what I was doing the way I would if I were training a new guy on the crew. Check the anchor, check the line, don't trust the snow crust. It kept me focused. Then, in late January, I saw the first sign of other living people near my basin. Not tracks on the main trail, not obvious camp smoke, something smaller and smarter. A snare wire. It wasn't my wire. I hadn't set snares because I didn't want to be on the ground more than necessary, and I didn't want to deal with the ethical and practical mess of trapping unless I had to. The wire was new, bright under the snow, and set with someone who knew what they were doing. I didn't touch it. I climbed back up, raised my bridges, and watched for 2 days straight. On the second day, I saw them. 2 people, moving careful, moving slow, moving like hunters. One tall, one shorter. Both layered up, both carrying packs. One of them had a rifle. They didn't look desperate, they looked deliberate. That was more frightening. Desperate people make noise and mistakes. Deliberate people plan. They walked to the area near the seep. They paused and listened, heads angled as if they expected to hear chopping. They scanned the canopy more than once, not in a casual way, but in a methodical sweep. My shelter had never felt smaller. I had built it to disappear, but when someone is actively looking for signs of life, even the best camouflage can start to feel like a thin blanket. The taller one stopped and pointed at something. The shorter one came over and crouched. They touched the snow, then looked up. My stomach tightened because I knew what they'd found. My old boot prints from a water run, lightly drifted over but not erased. I had tried to brush them out. I had tried to approach from different angles, but nothing is perfect. They backed off and circled wide, keeping their weight light. Stepping on packed spots when they could, they were tracking without looking like it, which is what good trackers do. I stayed still for hours. I didn't move, I didn't heat, I didn't even shift my weight on the platform. I listened to my own breath and tried to make it quieter. They left before dark, but not before the rifle came up once, just briefly, aimed into the trees as if the taller one had decided to test the idea of someone above them. He didn't fire. He just held it there for a long second, then lowered it. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every choice I'd made, every time I'd used the stove, every time I'd cut, every time I'd walked on crusted snow instead of deep powder. I realized that the infected weren't the only ones listening. Humans were listening too. And humans didn't stiffen in the cold the way the infected did. Humans could wait. Humans could plan. Humans could set traps. For the next week, I watched for them. They didn't come back immediately, and that was its own kind of message. It meant they weren't starving. It meant they had options. It meant they were choosing their timing. I started changing my patterns. I got water at different hours. I used the seep less and melted more snow despite the cost. I ate less hot food so I wouldn't need the stove as much. I stayed cold on purpose, shivering under layers, because cold was quieter than smoke. I also prepared for contact even though I didn't want it. Preparation wasn't about turning my shelter into a fortress. A fortress draws attention. Preparation was about having choices. I staged a bag with essentials: water, calories, fire-starting tools, first aid, so I could move if I had to. I checked my rope routes and made sure I had a controlled descent that didn't require a lot of motion or noise. I set up a second hide point in a nearby tree with just enough space to sit and watch, in case my main platform got compromised. And I thought hard about the one decision I kept avoiding: whether to stay a ghost or try to talk. The idea of negotiating with strangers sounded reasonable in a normal world. In this world, it felt like stepping onto a rotten limb because you liked the view. Still, the truth was simple. I couldn't stay hidden forever if someone was actively hunting for signs of life. They'd find my seep spot. They'd notice the way snow melted differently under certain branches. They'd watch for smoke on the right days. If I waited until they had me cornered, I would have no leverage. If I chose to speak first, I might be able to set terms. I didn't get to choose the timing. They did. They came back on a clear morning when the temperature was brutally low. The kind of morning where sound carries like it's on a wire. I saw them before they saw me, moving along the logging trail with that same careful pace. The rifle was visible. This time, the taller one also had binoculars. They stopped at the edge of the basin and listened. Then the shorter one did something that made my skin go cold in a new way. He whistled. Not loud, not a tune, just a sharp, controlled whistle that punched through the trees. It was a test sound, a way to see what moved, a way to see if the infected reacted and from where. A minute later, I saw it. Two infected figures, slow and stiff, turning their heads toward the sound. They started moving, dragging feet through snow. The taller man watched them with calm interest, like he was checking a trap line. Then he looked up into the canopy again, right where my platform was hidden. I stayed still. He raised the rifle, not pointing randomly this time. He aimed at a specific patch of branches. He wasn't sure, but he had a suspicion. The shorter one said something I couldn't hear, and the taller one lowered the rifle slightly, then called out. "Hey," he said, "we know you're up there. We're not here to start trouble. We're here to talk." My heart hammered. The infected were still coming, slow but steady, drawn by the earlier whistle. The two strangers didn't seem worried. That told me they had handled this before. I weighed everything in a few seconds. If I said nothing, they could leave and come back later with a better plan. If I spoke, I gave away certainty. Yes, someone is here. But they already had that. I leaned forward just enough to see them clearly through a gap in needles. The taller one was in his 30s or 40s, heavy jacket, face rough from cold and stress, eyes sharp. The shorter one looked younger, maybe mid-20s, with a beanie pulled low and a scarf covering most of his face. Both had that lean look people get when they're burning more calories than they're eating. I made my voice carry without yelling. "I'm not coming down," I said. "Say what you need to say from there." The taller one nodded like that was fair. "Name's Ray," he said. "This is Colin. We've been watching this area. We've seen signs. We're not here to take what you've got. We're here because winter's not done with us, and two people don't do everything well." I didn't answer right away. I watched the infected behind them, still closing, slower than a normal person, but relentless. "You whistled on purpose," I said. "You're drawing them." Ray glanced over his shoulder like he was checking the weather. "Yeah," he said. "We wanted to see where they were, also wanted to see if you'd react." Colin shifted his pack slightly and looked up at the canopy with his eyes narrowed, searching for shape and line. I could tell he was trying to locate the platform. I stayed behind cover. "You two alone?" I asked. Ray paused for half a beat. "Just us," he said. "We've been moving between spots. We've got a cabin we use sometimes, but it's not safe to stay put." That could have been true. It could also have been a clean lie. The way he said it, smooth, practiced, made me think he'd lied plenty lately. Most people had. Survival turns honesty into a luxury item. The infected were close enough now that I could hear them. Not growls like movies, more like wet breathing and slow foot drag. Ray and Colin stood their ground. Ray raised his rifle and fired once. The crack cut through the basin like a hammer on glass. The nearest infected dropped into the snow. He fired again. Another one fell. I flinched, even though I expected it. The sound punched me in the chest. For a moment, the entire forest seemed to listen. Ray didn't fire again. He waited, scanning for more movement. The remaining infected, farther out, turned their heads toward the shots, but their response was slow, delayed by cold and distance. Ray looked up again. "We can keep it quiet most days," he said, "but sometimes you need the loud tool." I didn't like him saying that like it was a rule he owned. I also couldn't ignore the fact that he handled it cleanly. No panic, no waste. "What do you want?" I asked. Ray took a breath, and his words came out careful. "We want a trade," he said. "Not today, not right now, but soon. We've got things you don't. Medical supplies, some ammo, a little fuel. We've got a radio that still picks up some chatter on certain nights. We think you've got shelter and skills. We've seen cut marks on dead wood. We've seen the way some branches are trimmed for sight lines. Somebody up there knows what they're doing." I stayed silent. "Here's the truth," Ray continued. "We've been looking for someone who can move quiet and work smart. We're hungry, we're cold. We're not trying to be heroes, we're trying to make it to spring." "And if I say no?" I asked. Ray's face didn't change much. "Then we walk away," he said. "But we'll still be out here, and we'll still know you're out here." That last sentence was the real message. Not a threat exactly, but not friendly either. A fact delivered like a lever. I felt my options narrowing like a rope cinching. If I accepted contact, I risked being pulled into their problems. If I refused, I risked them deciding later that my shelter was worth taking. I also thought about the other risk. What if they weren't alone? What if they had people watching from a distance? What if the trade was just a way to get me to show myself? I spoke slowly. "I'm not coming down," I said again. "If you want to trade, you leave something in the snow by that dead spruce at the edge of the trail. Back away, then I'll decide if I leave something in return. No faces close, no rushing, no tricks." Ray nodded once like he'd expected that. "Fair," he said. "We'll do it tomorrow, same time. You leave something that tells us you're serious." I didn't answer. I watched them turn and walk away, their tracks crisp in the snow, their bodies shrinking into the trees. When they were gone, I sat back inside my shelter and listened to the silence settle again. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of what had just happened. That night, I used no heat at all. I stayed bundled and awake, listening for any sign of them circling back. I heard nothing. I still didn't trust it. In the dark, I forced myself to think like a professional. Not like a scared man in a tree. A professional asks, what are the failure points? What are the risks? What is the plan if the plan fails? Ray and Colin knew I existed. That was irreversible. The only question now was what kind of relationship that would become. The next morning, I watched the dead spruce by the trail through a crack in my cover. I didn't move until I saw them arrive. They came in the same way, cautious, scanning. They placed a small bundle at the base of the spruce, white cloth wrapped tight with cord, and then they backed away until they were at least 40 yards out. They waited. I waited longer. Then I lowered one bridge just enough to shift to a descent route that kept me mostly hidden. I climbed down on rope, moved low and slow, and approached the bundle from an angle that kept trees between me and them. Every step on the snow sounded loud. I placed my feet carefully, rolling weight, trying to avoid crust snaps. My breath fogged in front of my face. I kept my hands visible, my rifle slung but not in my hands. I reached the bundle, picked it up, and backed away without opening it. Then I returned to my rope and climbed back up fast, the way you do when you know you're exposed and you hate it. Only when I was back in the shelter did I open it. Inside was a small, sealed medical kit, real supplies, not random junk. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, pain relief, and a couple of antibiotic packets. There was also a handwritten note on a scrap of notebook paper. Trade. No games. We want to make it. That was the first time in months I held proof that another human was thinking ahead, not just reacting. It didn't make them safe. It made them competent. Competent can be good. Competent can also be dangerous. I considered what to trade back. Food was obvious, but food is also power. If I gave them too much, they'd come back wanting more. If I gave them too little, they'd assume I was weak or stingy. In the end, I chose information and a small, controlled gift. I wrote my own note. Wind from northwest tonight, still air tomorrow morning. Do not shoot unless necessary. Sound carries. I added a small bag of high-calorie food, peanut butter packets, and a couple of dense energy bars. Just enough to say I was serious, not enough to feed them for a week. I left it by the dead spruce later when I was sure the area was clear. Over the next 2 weeks, the trade pattern continued. Always at a distance, always controlled. They gave more medical supplies and, once, a small handheld radio that could pick up weather band and some faint voices at night if you tuned it carefully. I gave food in small amounts and, more importantly, advice about moving through the basin without drawing infected. I never told them where my shelter was. Not directly, but I could feel Colin's eyes searching every time they were near. Ray started leaving longer notes. Short, practical lines. Not emotional. Saw tracks near the lake to the south, not ours. Heard an engine 2 nights ago. Someone is burning fuel nearby. That's when I realized something that changed the whole situation. Ray and Colin weren't only watching me. They were watching the region. They were building a map of threats and opportunities. They were trying to own the area the way a trapper owns a line. I didn't like that, but I also couldn't deny that their information was useful. Then, one afternoon in early February, the worst possible thing happened. I slipped. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a big fall. It was the kind of mistake that happens when you're tired and you rush one step. I was on a descent line, boots on a branch that looked thicker than it was. The branch flexed, the snow crust broke, and my right foot slid. My harness caught me, But the sudden load jerked my hip hard and pain shot down my leg. I hung there for a second, gritting teeth, then hauled myself back up with shaking arms. I got into the shelter and tested my leg. I could stand, but it wasn't right. It felt like a deep strain, maybe worse. In normal life, I'd have taken ibuprofen, iced it, and rested. Out here, rest is a gamble. The next day, I could still move, but every step hurt. That meant more time on tasks, more time exposed, more risk. And it meant something else. If Ray and Colin decided to push, I couldn't move fast enough to counter. I didn't tell them right away. I tried to hide it. But when you're trading with someone who watches patterns, they notice changes. 2 days later, Ray left a note with their bundle. "You moving slower, you hurt." I stared at that note for a long time. It wasn't concern, it was assessment. I could lie, I could say nothing, or I could use the truth as a tool. I wrote back. Strained leg, still functional, still not coming down, still watching. The next bundle included pain relief and a better wrap, plus a note. "We're not your enemy unless you make us your enemy." That sentence sat in my chest like a stone. Because it was true in the worst way. In this world, people don't become enemies because of who they are. They become enemies because of decisions. One wrong decision, one wrong move, and the line gets crossed. A week later, I found out there were more people in the woods than any of us realized. It started with distant voices at night. Not close enough to understand. Just sound drifting on still air the way a snowmobile engine can carry miles. Then, a faint orange flicker one night far to the west. Firelight, someone burning. Ray's next note confirmed it. 3-person group near the lake. They shoot too much, they will bring trouble. He was right. 2 days after that, I heard multiple gunshots in the distance. Then later, the slow, chaotic movement of infected, drawn toward that noise. Not a horde like movies, but a steady trickle from different directions, like broken pieces pulled toward a magnet. The infected wandered into new areas, into my basin, into Ray and Colin's roots. Winter slowed them, but it didn't stop the effect of noise. It just stretched it out over hours. That's when Ray did something bold. He asked for a meeting. Not face-to-face at the base of my tree, but close enough. His note said, "Need to talk. Not about trade, about spring, about moving. Meet at the big fallen cedar by the trail at 2 p.m. We stay back, you stay back. We talk loud enough to hear. No one does anything stupid." I hated the idea. I also knew the world was changing again. The deeper winter got, the more desperate people became. And if spring came, the infected might change too. Warmer temperatures could mean faster movement, more activity. I decided to go, but only on my terms. I chose a route that kept me covered. I brought the radio. I brought my rifle, but kept it slung. I wrapped my leg tight and moved slow. At 2 p.m., Ray and Colin were there, standing on opposite sides of the fallen cedar like it was a border. They kept distance. Ray's rifle stayed on his shoulder, not in his hands. Ray spoke first. "You built something smart," he said. "But smart doesn't matter if other people find it. The group by the lake is loud. They'll draw infected and they'll draw humans. When spring comes, everyone who survived winter is going to start moving. They'll start searching. Your smoke, your tracks, your water spot. Someone will see it." Colin added, voice muffled through his scarf. "We can help you stay hidden, or we can help you move, but we want in." That was it, the real offer. Not trade, partnership, or takeover dressed like partnership. I kept my voice steady. "What does it mean?" I asked. Ray didn't hesitate. "It means you don't hoard in the trees while we freeze on the ground," he said. "It means we share shelter nights when the cold is worst. It means we build something bigger when the thaw hits. We've got a plan to reach a safer structure before roads open up and everyone starts swarming." Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.